All right, we are now going to be solving two-step equations. So, remember we have been working on solving one-step equations, and remember those steps, and we'll just kind of expand on them now. The difference here is we're just adding in an additional step. So instead of doing it in one time through, we might have to do it a couple times. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is simplify whenever possible. That includes things like collecting like terms, distributive property, those types of things. Next, we're going to draw an upside down capital T through the equal sign. Remember, that is simply an organizational tool that helps us keep straight. Whatever we do to one side, we're going to do to the other. We need to make sure that our left and right sides stay equal. Now, here is where it starts to happen here. So on step number 3, we isolate the variable by using inverse operations to solve the equation. Remember, what that means is isolate the variable means we want to get the variable completely by itself. So we have to keep working until we get down to x equals or something equals x. Okay, now how do we get rid of the stuff? How do we get rid of the numbers next to that variable? Well, the way that we do that is by using inverse operations. Remember, inverse operations are things that undo each other. So when we have addition in our problem, we're going to use subtraction to undo it. If we have subtraction in our problem, we're going to use addition to undo it. If we have multiplication in our problem, we're going to use division to undo it. If we have division in our problem, we're going to use multiplication to undo it. Now, since this is a two-step, what we're going to do is we're going to repeat steps 2 and 3 again until the variable is completely isolated. Now, once we have done that, once the variable is isolated, that should be your answer. So your answer will say x equals some number or some number equals x. Remember, x has to be completely isolated, completely by itself. Then, remember, you have the option, you can check your answer by plugging that value back in to the original equation, working it out, and see if it comes out to be what it's supposed to be. So the question comes, does it matter which one I start with? What if I want to do this one compared to this one? Does the order matter? Well, if the order matters, then how do I know what I start with? So basically, it is reverse order of operations. Remember the other day, we went back and reviewed evaluating algebraic expressions. And remember, we took that value of x, we plugged it into the x, and then we worked it out using order of operations, right? So the way that we undo that is we go in reverse. So if you kind of think about it, if you plug the number in and let's say first you would multiply by 2 and then you would add 3. Well, when we solve, we're going to get rid of the adding 3 first, then we're going to get rid of the multiplying by 2 second. So it's basically reverse order of operation, okay? Now, another way to kind of think of it too is you're looking for what is least connected to the variable. So the thing that is not necessarily furthest away, but the least connected mathematically to that variable, okay? So let's try a couple, and I think you'll really catch on pretty quickly with this. So here we go. Let's look at number 1. So we start off and we have 3x plus 16. Well, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to cover this up for just a second because we don't need it right now. So when I look at that problem, I want to get x by itself. So if I had a number to plug in, I would multiply that number by 3, then subtract 8. So when I am solving then, that means that 8 is the least connected. So since I'm subtracting 8, I'm going to add 8 to both sides. Okay, let me get back my number now that I covered up earlier. So now we're going to add that 8 to it. So I'm going to carry down my 3x, 16 plus the 8, that is going to give me 24. Now my next step, I'm going to take 3 times x, so to undo that, I divide by 3. And that's going to give me x equals 8. Okay, now here's what the check looks like. So to check this, we take this 8 and we simply plug it back in. So it looks like this. 3 times 8 minus 8. So if we start in, 3 times 8 is 24. 24 minus 8 is 16. And that is what we wanted. So that means that we have the correct answer. Okay? So let's try number 2. So when we look at number 2 here, we start in. Remember, we're not worried about the 11 right now. We're worried about the side that has the letter. So if I were to plug a number in there, I would multiply it by 2, then I would add 3. So we need to get rid of the 3 first. Remember, we look in front of the number. The number is a positive 3, so to get rid of that, we are going to subtract 3 from both sides. 11 minus 3 gives me 8. I'm going to bring down my 2y. Be careful and make sure that you're bringing down that symbol. This symbol is a plus, so I just bring down that positive 2y. Okay, now we have 2y, 2 times y, so to undo that, I'm going to divide by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and my answer comes out as y equals 4. All right, so let's check that. So when we check it, we're literally just going to take that, plug it back in. So 3 plus 2 times 4. So we would go 2 times 4 is 8, so 3 plus 8, that's 11. That's what we started with. You bet, we got that correct. All right, let's continue down. Let's try a different kind of style of problem. Same process, just a little different look to it. Okay, so we start in and we say, okay, what am I doing to x? So if I were to plug a number into that x, order of operations would say I have to add 5 to it first. Then I would divide by 2. So to undo that, I am going to multiply by 2. And that's going to leave me x plus 5 equals a negative 8. Then I look and I have x plus 5. So to undo that, I am going to minus 5. So that's going to give me x equals negative 13. All right, so now let's check it. So to check it, we're going to plug the negative 13 in for x. And now we work that out. So order of operations, remember, even though they're not written, there is kind of a hidden set of parentheses there because it's in a fraction. So negative 13 plus 5, that's going to get me negative 8. Negative 8 divided by 2, that's negative 4, and that is exactly what we wanted. So we know we have the correct answer. All right, let's do number 4. So when we look at number 4 here, we start off similar ways. So think to yourself, what is the least connected to that variable? So if we plugged a number in for w, the first thing we would do is divide it by 3, then we would subtract 6. So to undo that, what we're going to do is we're going to add our 6 first. So when we add our 6, we end up with negative 3 plus 6. Well, if you think money, I have $6, but I want to borrow 3 or I want to buy something for $3, so that leaves me with $3. Now we take and we have, okay, w divided by 3, so to undo that, I'm going to multiply by 3. So now I'm going to get w equals 3 times 3 is 9. All right, let's check that. So to check it, we're going to take the 9, plug it in, so it'll say 9 over 3 minus 6. Well, remember, we're going to do the division first, so 9 divided by 3 is 3 minus 6. Now think money again. You have $3, but you want to buy something for 6. In order for that to happen, you have to borrow $3. So that's why we get a negative 3. That's the number we wanted it to be, so that tells me I have the correct answer. Now, we're going to do 2 more of these because they just have a little tricky step to them that I want you to see, something that a lot of students will do incorrectly. So let's just double check a couple of these styles. So the first one here, if you look at this problem, a lot of students would say, hey, that's a 1 step. I really don't have to worry about it. But it's not. It's actually a 2, and here's the reason why. If I were to plug a number in for x, what I would do is I would take negative 12 minus that number. Sounds like a 1 step. But remember, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the number in front there. So the 12, we got to get rid of the 12. Now, we don't look behind it because that negative is attached to that x. So that is linked together. So we look in front, it's a negative 12. So to get rid of that, I'm going to add 12 to both sides. So now that gets rid of that. That leaves me negative x. 12 plus 12 gives me 24. Now, what number is attached to that negative with the x? Well, remember that is like writing negative 1x. Those are the same thing. So when you look at that, what we're going to do is it's negative 1 times x. So to undo that, we're just simply going to divide by a negative 1. Remember, dividing by a negative 1 does nothing to the number except for switches it to its opposite. So that becomes negative 24. Okay, now here's what the check looks like for that problem. So if you plug that back in, it would say negative 12 minus negative 24. Remember, negative 12 minus a negative turns into adding a positive. So therefore, we have $24 and we want to buy something for 12. I would be left with $12, which is what we want the answer to be there. So that tells me I have the correct answer. Okay, let's try one more here on number 6. So on number 6, once again, we start looking. Order of operations, we ignore the negative 24 for now. We take a number, plug it in. If I were to plug that in, I would multiply it by the 3. Then I would take 6 minus that answer. Well, so that means we need to get rid of the 6 first. Remember that this negative is attached to the 3x. So what we do is we look in front of the 6. The 6 is a positive number. So to undo that, I am going to subtract 6 from both sides. So now I have negative 24 minus 6. Well, think money again if it gives you any problems. Remember, you can do plus and negative also, and that would get us negative 30. Because think about it, you borrowed $24, you borrow 6 more, that's going to put you at $30 in the hole there. Then we carry down. Now, you have to make sure you carry that negative with the 3x. So now when we come down to the next step, I'm negative 3 times x. So to undo that, I am going to divide both sides by a negative 3. So that's going to get me 10 is equal to x. So now we take and we check that. So we check that by taking 6 minus 3 times 10. Well, 3 times 10 is 30, so 6 minus 30. Remember, we can do plus the negative. So when you think about that, you have $6, but you want to buy something that costs you $30. So therefore, you need to borrow $24. That's the answer we want, and that's making sure that we have the correct answer of 10. Okay? Now, we can also, just like with one-step problems, we can also do these into word problems. Okay? So let's read through it. It says the sum of 12 and the product of 7 and a number is 61. What is the number? Okay, so let's key up some of the important words. So first word is sum. Next word I see is product, and I see this word is. Okay, so let's go back now and see what these words mean. Hopefully we remember the other day we talked about it. Sum means addition. Well, what am I adding? Well, I'm adding 12 and the product of 7 and a number. Okay, now what does the word product mean? Product means multiplication. Well, what am I multiplying? I am multiplying 7 and a number. Okay, so these go to the multiplication step. Then my last one here is the word is. And is an equal sign. So let's see if we can write this out now. So I have the sum of 12. Remember, it's an addition, so 12 plus what? The product multiplying 7 and a number. And that will give me 61. So that's what our equation should look like. My next step now is I'm going to go to solve it. So my 12 is the least connected. So I'm going to subtract 12. That would leave me 7x is equal to 49. I'm just going to recopy it over here for room. And now I'm going to take 7x equals 49. So I'm going to divide by 7. So x would equal 7. Okay? Now, let's do more of a real-world example instead of just using math vocabulary. So let's take a look at this second one. It says a person rented a car that costs $120 plus $2 per mile. If the person spent $216, how many miles did they drive? Okay, so let's start to set up. So the first thing I notice is they spent $216. The cost was $120 plus $2 per mile. So the $216, really, if you think about it, that's going to be my total. Okay, so that's my equal to part. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. Equals 216. Now, let's go back to the other sense. A person rented a car that cost $120. So even if I don't drive it at all, I pay the $120 to rent it. But then I have to add on $2 per mile, and X is representing the number of miles. So whatever number of miles I drive it, I have to times that by 2, then add the 120, and that should give me 216. So now, the least connected thing is the 120. So I'm going to minus that. That would get me 2x is equal to 216 minus 120. That's going to get me 96. At that point, I'm going to divide by 2. And that's going to get me x equals 48. So my final thing, I always like to write a sentence just to make sure I answered it. And it would be, they drove 48 miles. And there's my answer. Okay, so that's how we solve two-step equations.